In ancient times, in the depths of the dark forest, there lived vicious and creepy cyclops. They were tall, muscular creatures with huge eyes that glowed like lights in the darkness. Cyclops were known for their cruelty and for eating anyone who dared to enter their territory. One day, a group of brave travelers decided to explore the forest, unaware of the terrible threat that awaited them. As they entered the depths of the forest, the Cyclops pounced on them, their cries of despair echoing throughout the forest. But one of the travelers, named Leonid, managed to kill one of the Cyclops using his sword and wit. The remaining Cyclops were furious and vowed to avenge their brother. They began to chase Leonid and his companions through the forest, but they managed to escape and find shelter in an old abandoned fortress deep in the forest. But they knew that the Cyclops would never stop and would seek retribution. When Leonid and his companions came inside the fortress, they discovered that it was actually the citadel of the Cyclops, where they kept all their enemies imprisoned. They realized that their capture was only a matter of time. But they came up with a bold and risky plan. They decided to free the prisoners and fight the Cyclops to the last. After the prisoners were freed, Leonid and his companions were confronted with the terrible truth about Cyclops. It turned out that their creepy essence far surpasses just cruelty and gluttony. The Cyclops used the captives as food, but not only physical, but their souls, carried away by the Cyclops to strengthen their strength and power. But the top floor of the citadel hid an even more terrible truth. There, in a hidden temple, Leonid and his company discovered an ancient altar where Cyclops sacrificed higher beings in exchange for their terrible power. It was here that the Cyclops found malicious inspiration and powerful forces for their terrible deeds. Once again experiencing the threat of death, Leonid and his companions decided to find a way to destroy the temple and deprive the Cyclops of the source of their evil power. But they felt that the threat was not only for them. In their dreams, warning images of powerful ancient beings appeared, who seemed to be interested in the situation of their own lives and fate. Their fight against Cyclops was not only for their lives, but also for the fate of all living beings in the world. But in order to understand what forces can help them in this struggle, Leonid and his companions will have to embark on a dangerous journey that will turn out to be much more mysterious and dangerous than they could have imagined. Secret magics, ancient riddles, and terrible creatures will very soon become part of their path. And they realize that only they themselves can solve these mysteries and gain the strength necessary to fight the Cyclops and their terrible allies. Leonid and his companions embarked on a path that led them to an ancient temple known as the Temple of Forgotten Treasures. It was a place where, according to legends, powerful artifacts and knowledge were hidden that could help in the fight against evil. However, the temple was favored by creepy creatures that have guarded its treasures for centuries. Overcoming traps and darkness, wandering through forgotten corridors, they finally reached the sacred cave, where there was a mysterious artifact, the Crystal of Forgotten Fate. This ancient artifact, as the legends said, had the power to predict the future and deal with those who upset the balance of the world. However, when touching the crystal, Leonid and his companions were struck by visions of despair and fear. They saw the destruction and darkness that the Cyclops intended to bring upon the world. It is obvious that the Cyclops were an instrument of the dark forces behind the scenes, and the Crystal of Forgotten Fate showed them that their struggle was just beginning. Leonid and his comrades realized that they needed to awaken the old forces in order to respond to the challenge of evil. But to do this, they had to return to the human world and find the remnants of ancient knowledge that could provide a clue. Their path led into the depths of the Forbidden Ruins, where, as legends said, Ancient scrolls containing forgotten knowledge about allies in the fight against evil were hidden, but their opponents were already on their way. The Cyclops sent their best warriors and black magicians to thwart Leonid's plans and capture the crystal of the forgotten fate. He was walking down a dark alley, surrounded by shadow and gloom. The wind permeated his suit to the marrow of his bones, making every cell of his body tremble. He knew he was going to meet something sinister, but he couldn't stop. His curiosity was stronger than the fear that enveloped him like a dense fog. When he came to the old lantern-lit building, his heart stopped. He knew that something terrible was waiting for him inside, but his feet led him to the door by themselves. The old house looked as if it had been abandoned for many years, but the light in the windows indicated that someone was still alive inside. He carefully opened the door and went inside. Suddenly, the air became dense and stuffy, as if the entire essence of the building was breathing sinister energy. Each step was heavy and slow, as if the ground was soaked with blood and fear. In a room lit by flickering candlelight, he saw a figure standing by the window. She was dressed in a black robe and had no face. His heart began to pound in horror when he realized that he was not alone in this sinister place. "Who are you?" he whispered, but his voice was drowned in the gloomy atmosphere. The figure slowly turned towards him, and he saw two empty spaces instead of eyes. His body was paralyzed with fear, and he realized that he had fallen into a trap from which there was no escape. He stood in front of the faceless figure, feeling fear slowly engulf his every cell. The air was heavy, as if a sinister energy permeated the house, and he felt that he was not just a casual guest in this place. "What do you want from me?" he hissed, trying to keep his cool. The only answer was an incomprehensible whisper that surrounded him from all sides. Suddenly, candles flickered, and ominous laughter rang in the air, as if reflecting off the walls and filling his mind with gloomy thoughts. He closed his eyes, trying to suppress the inner terror, but when he opened them again, the figure was already next to him, as if bringing death and destruction. A sea wave of fear ran through him, and he realized that he was surrounded by something that he could not understand. "Who are you?" he shouted, but his voice sounded weak and helpless in this hellish world. The figure silently pointed at the door deeper into the house, and he realized that he would have to go where he did not want to go. With each step deeper into the dark corridor, his fear increased, and his mind refused to perceive the reality around him. Every step in the dark corridor was heavy, as if the earth was pulling him deeper into its embrace. Rustles and ghostly shadows played in the corners of his mind, causing his heart to beat faster and his breathing to become more shallow. At the end of the corridor, he saw a door made of dark wood covered with ancient carvings, fascinating in their mystery. He opened the door and entered the next room, where he was greeted by an unspeakable darkness. Some shadows were climbing the walls like living creatures, and the whole air was filled with sinister malice. He felt his body tremble, and cold streams of sweat ran down his cheeks. Then he heard a faint whisper that seemed to come from the dark depths of the room. "You will go to the end to find out the truth," sounded inside his head like a ghost of the past. He barely restrained the cry of horror that rose in his throat and stepped forward. Swallowing the darkness around him, his feet felt something cold and smooth, and he realized that it was a huge stone. He lowered his hand to feel it, and at the same moment his hand touched something soft and icy. He recoiled, recoiling from something that was sliding under his fingers. And then he heard a rustle that rose from the darkness. A blinding light pierced his consciousness, and at that moment he saw something that made him scream in horror. When the main character finally got to the exit of the abandoned house, he discovered that his friends had already died unhappily at the hands of the sinister ghost that had been haunting them up to that moment. He realized that he himself was the future victim of this sinister creature, and realizing that he could not survive, he decided to try to save his friends from this evil by sacrificing his own life. Thus, they were all swallowed up by the darkness of this ancient place, and their souls remained here forever, turning into new ghosts that will haunt any unfortunate who dares to enter this cursed house.